there, this is Achilles drill where nearly success gets simplified, and welcome to my lecture today where I'll walk you through some common neuroanatomy steeplechase questions that could be thrown at you from coronal sections across the brain. So in this beautiful session, we will be taking coronal cuts across the brain, and then I will draw your attention to some points that could be common questions in your steeplechase. Do well to stick with me. Alright, let's get straight to work. So in this beautiful picture, you should be seeing certain cuts across the brain, and you can see we're making cuts along this direction. We're cutting the brain in this direction, and then we're traveling backwards, and this is how today's class will proceed. We'll be making cuts across the brain, and then we'll be bringing out those sections, and then I'll be drawing your attention to some different gray matters and white matter along the cuts. Okay, as we'll be going backwards, as we're proceeding backwards, traveling backward, we encounter all sorts of gray matter, and they are very important. They are different. Everything is not the same. Some parts are part of the encephalon, some belong to the basal ganglia, and I will share you tips as regards identifying these different gray matter. All right, so do well to stick with me. Now take a look at those beautiful pictures too. Again, we're making cuts along this plane. You have to get that at the back of your mind. Okay, this is how we're cutting through the brain. So at a point, we'll be cutting in the rostral part of the brain, and then we'll be traveling a bit backward to make another cut in this direction, and then we'll make another cut in this direction, and then till we get to the very back. All right, so we're traveling backwards. All right, starting, let's take our first cut now. Let's make our first cut in this direction, the one in red, kind of like the rostral part of the brain, the anterior most part of the brain. What do you think we're going to see? Well, this picture will say just that. Take a look at this beautiful picture. Now, there are some things that should struck your mind immediately that are kind of very much familiar. For example, if I'm asking you what region is right here, what's the name of this fissure right there? Can you identify it? We've identified it in our last two sessions. Well, that's actually the longitudinal fissure. It's very much noticeable, right? That's a longitudinal fissure. But the thing is, sometimes it will not be the longitudinal fissure itself that you'll be asked to identify. There could be a blood vessel around there. For example, you could find, let me erase this for now. You could find some blood vessels, and they'll be residing within this longitudinal fissure. Most likely, it is a branch from the anterior cerebral artery. So if a blood vessel is pinned around this longitudinal fissure in your steeplechase, you should identify it as the anterior, as a branch from the anterior cerebral artery. And I mean the lateral fissure. We're not seeing the lateral fissure here, but the lateral fissure, when we travel backward, to be somewhere here. And in recent, the blood vessel very much associated with the lateral fissure are branches from the middle cerebral artery. Okay, we'll get just there. We'll get there as we go on. So we've identified the fact that this is the longitudinal fissure very much associated with the branches from the anterior cerebral artery. And now there is one important gyrus I want to draw your attention to. But before that, do you agree with me that right here is the corpus callosum? The corpus callosum is that commissural fiber, that important commissural fiber linking the two cerebral hemispheres together. Okay, there are a number of them, but corpus callosum is very much prominent and it's the largest of them all. Alright, so it's right there linking the two fibers. We will see it right from the front. And residing just above it is one gyrus. Can you remind me what that gyrus is? We talked about it in our lecture on some common questions from the mid-sagittal view of the brain. What gyrus is that? Of course, that's the cingulate gyrus. The cingulate gyrus resides just above the corpus callosum, and trust me, that gyrus right there can be pinned in your steeplechase. Apart from the fact too that, of course, the corpus callosum can be pinned too, and you'll be asked to identify it. But before we move on, I want to draw your attention to this very beautiful cavity around the brain. Do you know what this cavity is? Can you guess? That cavity located somewhere within the cerebral hemisphere is a large ventricle of the brain. Well, those are the lateral ventricles. But if we are to be very much specific, this is the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle. Don't forget, in that our earlier picture, we're kind of cutting the brain in this direction. Let me go back to that beautiful picture. Take a look at this. We made a cut from where? In this direction, right? And then we brought it out, we flipped it downward. But in recent, when you flip it down, you actually see some two cavities residing within. Those are your lateral ventricles. Do you remember in your neuroanatomy, the lateral ventricles are somewhere residing in the brain in this direction, and they'll be lying like this. These are the lateral ventricles. It is made up of an anterior horn, there is a body, there is a posterior horn, otherwise called the occipital horn, and there is an inferior horn, otherwise called the temporal horn. So if we made a section across this part, we would sure see a tiny bit of that and of the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle, and that was what we got in this particular picture. Okay, that was what we got, and these are the two lateral ventricles residing just there. Okay, and trust me, this part can be asked in your steeplechase. In fact, in my time I remember that coming out. It's very easy to identify. Okay, they are simply the lateral ventricles of the brain. Okay, and if I have to be very much specific, the anterior horn of the lateral ventricles of the brain. Can we try and travel a bit backward now? Okay, for example, earlier we were here. Now let's kind of cut a bit posterior to what we made earlier, a more posterior section across the brain. That's what we want to do now. And what do you think we'll find? Well, let me show you a picture of that. We'll find something like this. All right, this is what we'll find. And yes, you've encountered a number of the structures before. For example, if I ask you what feature is this, obviously the longitudinal fissure. And then what band of white matter is right here linking up the two cerebral hemispheres? Remind me, the corpus callosum. You are doing great. How about this beautiful gyrus residing just immediately above the corpus callosum? Remind me again, the cingulate gyrus. The cingulate gyrus is right there. Okay, now, but there is this new structure we just encountered, a very prominent and beautiful gray matter. Well, you might not know it right here. It is residing just lateral to the lateral ventricles. You know, these are the two lateral ventricles, of course, but just lateral to it, you will find some beautiful gray matter. Okay, that gray matter is actually the caudate nucleus. Okay, the caudate nucleus. I don't know if you checked out my video on some common neuroanatomy steeplechase questions associated with the mid-sagittal section across the brain, you will very much remember this picture. Okay, and we did explain the fact that the caudate nucleus are these two structures right here. Okay, in recent, it's not just only in one place. It's actually made up of a head that continues backward as a tail and all. So it is residing somewhere around here, just immediately lateral to the two lateral ventricles. Okay, so that gray matter, you could be asked to identify it, and trust me, it's very much easy to identify it. It is just right there as a gray matter, and it is residing lateral to the lateral ventricle. All right, so how about we kind of get a beautiful textbook picture so you get your orientation right regarding these different gray matters. All right, so initially in our first cut, in which we're not seeing the gray matter, we're cutting somewhere along here. Okay, so we're not really seeing any of these structures making up the basal ganglia, the likes of the thalamus making up the diencephalon. We are not seeing them yet, but now this is our second cut that we are discussing now. It is somewhere along here, so that's why we could see a part of the caudate nucleus. That's why we could see it. Yes, and certainly, of course, the lateral ventricles are still running somewhere within here. They're still running right there. Okay, so but because we are now a bit more posterior, that's why we could see a portion of the caudate nucleus around there. Are we good? All right, so, and trust me, as we'll be traveling a bit further backwards, as we are going further backwards, we won't be having a constant shape of the caudate nucleus. Remember earlier when we were here, the caudate nucleus was very prominent and large, but when we travel a bit more backward, what we'll be finding as the caudate will just be a very small body. It will still be lateral to the lateral ventricle, of course, but it will be kind of smaller in shape. And if we even go further back, it will be a bit more smaller. And if we go most posterior, we won't even find it again. If we go most posterior within the occipital lobe, we won't find the caudate nucleus right there again. Okay, but I just want you to get the fact that their shapes are constantly changing as you are traveling backward, and we'll be encountering new set of structures. Okay, but for now, we already identified the caudate nucleus. Alright, let's make a more posterior cut through the brain. Let's say we want to cut through this part right now. Okay, earlier our first session was far in front. We're making a cut in far in front, and then we stepped a bit backward and make a cut along this direction. I want to make this green cut such that we are featuring a part of the caudate nucleus and even a part of the putamen. All right. So, and this is what we'll have here. We'll have something like this. Okay. So get your orientation right again. Certainly, this is our longitudinal fissure, the cingulate gyrus, the corpus callosum, the two lateral ventricles are right here. And then immediately lateral to these lateral ventricles are what? The two caudate nuclei. There is one on this side and then there is another on this side. Okay, and now there is a new structure we are encountering. This is the first time we are seeing this structure. That structure is called the putamen. Okay, the putamen is right here. It is a structure also belonging to the basal ganglia. In recent, when we travel a bit more backward, we encounter another part called the globus pallidus. It will be somewhere around here. Together, the putamen as well as the globus pallidus are collectively called the lentiform nuclei. Okay, but take note of this putamen. Okay, and that structure too can be pinned in your steeplechase. But how will you distinguish it or differentiate it from your caudate nucleus? A caudate nuclei are lying immediately lateral to the lateral ventricles. Okay, and then you will find a thin layer of internal capsule, one white structure right here. I don't know if you're seeing this. Can you zoom into this? Are you seeing this trace internal capsule right here? It is separating the caudate nucleus right there above from the lentiform nucleus, which is actually made up of the globus pallidus on the inside and the putamen on the outside. Okay, so we'll still see a better section across the brain in which those structures will be very much more prominent. Okay, so but understand that we're not having two prominent gray matter along this cord. The caudate nucleus is there, the caudate nuclei, two of them, and then we're also having the putamen. They are right there. Putamen on this side, putamen on this side. All right, let's make a cut far more backwards in this brain such that we're involving the caudate nucleus, of course, and then we're still involving that putamen, which is somewhere around there, and then a part of the internal capsule will be lying somewhere around here. So just that I want you to see that internal capsule better. Okay, take a look at this picture right here. All right, still get your orientation right. The corpus callosum right here, the two lateral ventricle, of course, and then immediately lateral to them are what? The caudate nuclei. Can you now see the better internal capsule right here? It's kind of more distinctively located. Okay, so we can take a look at it, and it is separating the putamen. The putamen will be around here, and the internal capsule is separating it from the caudate nucleus. Okay, so we have it right there. And as a matter of fact, I said as we travel backward, we still find globus pallidus. Okay, we're not seeing that section right now, and that will be our next section. But is there any new structure we're coming across here? You agree with me? This is the septum pellucidum, right, separating the two lateral ventricles. And as a matter of fact, we have the fornix right here as well. Yeah, these structures right there are the column of the fornix. Okay, column of the fornix are right there. But now there are some newer structures we're coming across, some distinctive gray matter and white matter in this particular section. Of course, you understand that this is the putamen, right? Now, just lateral to the putamen, we're having another band of white matter. But before we get there, you agree with me, this is our internal capsule, right? Kind of media to it, we have the caudate nucleus right there. Now, after the putamen, which is in green here, we kind of have a white matter. That white matter is called the external capsule. I don't know if you're seeing it, it's just thin right there. Okay, that white matter is called the external capsule. Just the same way we're having an internal capsule, we're also having an external capsule. Just that in this case, it is lateral to the putamen. Okay, and just lateral to this external capsule, there is also a thin band of gray matter. That thin band of gray matter is called a claustrum. Okay, it's right there, it's called a claustrum. And in fact, still lateral to this claustrum, I know it's a lot of structure, but you will understand it, don't worry. Still lateral to the claustrum, we're having another thin band of white matter. That thin band of white matter is called the extreme capsule. Let me get blue for that. The extreme capsule. So we're having an internal capsule. Everything, they're all white matter. Internal capsule is a white matter, external capsule is a white matter, and then the extreme capsule as well, white matter. Just between the external and extreme capsule, there is a thin band of gray matter called what? Called the claustrum. I really want you to take note of that. Not that the function of the structures are known per se, but it's just good to connote them for identification's sake. Okay, and in fact, as you travel beyond the extreme capsule, which is right here, you'll be getting to the insular cortex. Okay, the insula is the next structure. The insula is the deepest part of the temporal lobe. Of course, it is the deepest cortex of the temporal lobe. So, and if we go beyond the extreme capsule, we'll just get to the cortex, the cerebral cortex, the insula. Okay, is what we have there. And lateral away from the insula, we'll simply be having the what? The Sylvian fissure. The Sylvian fissure is what is here associated with the middle cerebral artery, branches of middle cerebral artery. You can see them around lining that region, and most likely it is a branch of the middle cerebral artery. Okay, now let's make a further cut into the brain. Okay, so far our cut has been somewhere around here, involving the caudate nucleus, the putamen, the internal capsule. Now I want to make this important cut within the brain. Now this is where a number of questions will be thrown at you. In this part, our more prominent structure will be the thalamus. Okay, the thalamus will be the more prominent structure here, because we won't really be having the the caudate nucleus there. It will still be there, but we'll just be having a small part of it, the body. Okay, if we are making our cuts in this section, we'll still be having a caudate nucleus. It will just be a body, but the more prominent gray matter that will be seen here will be the thalami. Okay, the two thalami, they'll be right there, and in fact they are lying lateral to the third ventricle. You know, lying lateral to the lateral ventricles are the what? The caudate nuclei. Now, lying lateral to the third ventricle are the two thalami. Don't worry, this cut will make much more sense to you now. Let's take a look at it. Voila, we're right here. Okay, get your orientation right. So far, we have the corpus callosum, we have the two lateral ventricles, the septum pellucidum, the fornix, and then immediately lateral to the lateral ventricle, you can see the caudate nucleus. It is smaller now because we are now behind. It's just the body of the caudate nucleus there. In fact, when we travel far back, we'll just be seeing a tiny tail of the caudate nucleus. Okay, but right now, can you take a look at these newer structures we are coming across? This is the third ventricle. Okay, and lateral to this third ventricle, I'm emphasizing that the more important or more prominent gray matter will be the thalami, the two thalami. And you know the thalamus is made up of different nuclei. There is the anterior nucleus, there is the dorsomedial nucleus, and all, and even some white tract running within it. But then it will still be very much recognizable. It is residing lateral to the lateral ventricle. And as a matter of fact, we'll still be finding the internal capsule as well. Just that in this case, it will now be the posterior limb of the internal capsule. Okay, all right, you have to understand this now, that earlier in the previous picture we had, the part of the internal capsule we actually seen was the anterior limb of the internal capsule, but right here we're somewhere around the posterior limb of the internal capsule. Let me show you that earlier picture and how to readily understand this. Yeah, this was the previous cut we had, and you can see some traces of the internal capsule somewhere around here, and that's actually some part of the anterior limb of the internal capsule. Don't worry, in our next class, in which we'll be having horizontal section across the brain, you will see distinctively how the internal capsule is changing from an anterior to a posterior limb. Okay, the thing is, before we get to the level of the thalamus, you know, normally the thalamus will reside lateral to the third ventricle, somewhere around here. Okay, let's assume the third ventricle is somewhere around here. Now, the portion of the internal capsule we'll be encountering by the time we've not yet seen the two thalami will most likely be the anterior limb of the internal capsule. This is just a hint for you to recognize which part is it the anterior limb of the internal capsule we are seeing in this cut, or is it the posterior limb? Just understand that by the time you are seeing the thalamus, most likely that internal capsule will be the posterior limb. But right here that we are not seeing the thalamus yet, then certainly the trace of white internal capsule we are having here is the anterior limb of the internal capsule. Let's go back to our previous picture. Take a look at it again. All right, so at this point we are seeing the thalamus residing, let me get a better pen for that. Okay, we are seeing the thalamus residing lateral to the what? To the third ventricle in the midline right here. So obviously we expect the internal branch of internal capsule, or should I say the part of the internal capsule that is around here, to be the posterior limb. Are we good? Well, here's what I tell my students: if you are not too sure if it's the anterior limb or the posterior limb, it's best to just write the internal capsule, trust me. Okay, so one thing is better to be vaguely correct than to be specifically wrong. For example, if the part of the internal capsule is meant to be anterior limb, and in your steeplechase exam you made the mistake of writing the posterior limb, you are being specifically wrong. Okay, of course some questions will tell you to be, hey bro, be specific in this question, but others will just tell you what structure is this. In such cases, and you are not sure if it's the anterior or posterior limb, just write the internal capsule. Okay, so but if you give a specifically wrong answer to that question, then your lecturer will most likely mark it wrong. So understand the fact that yeah, sometimes it's best to just be vaguely correct than to be specifically wrong. All right, so let's get back to another part of this lecture. Take a look at this clean diagram. Yes, it's not labeled here, so we'll go gradually and recognize all that is around here. Don't worry, we're wrapping up the class already. So starting from things we've discussed earlier, do you understand what fissure this is? Longitudinal fissure. You should be echoing it with me by now. Okay, what branch of vessels are most likely going to be located around here? Remind me. Those branch of vessels are most likely branches of the anterior cerebral artery. So some of those vessels could be cleaned in your steeplechase. How about this white band of commissural fiber? Remind me what it is. The corpus callosum. You are doing well. The corpus callosum. Okay, we are leaving out something very important. There could be a gyrus residing above the corpus callosum right here. Remind me what that gyrus is. The cingulate gyrus. Okay, the cingulate gyrus. Okay, you should be recognizing these structures by now. How about this beautiful cavity right here? That beautiful cavity are the lateral ventricles. Okay, the lateral ventricles are right there, and as a matter of fact, it has a septum pellucidum which is separating them, and at the inferior part of it right here, we're even seeing some portion of the fornix as well. All right, so that's that about that. How about this beautiful gray matter located immediately lateral to the lateral ventricle? That's what? The caudate nucleus. Okay, again, if you're not sure if it's the head of the caudate nucleus, if it is the tail, if it's the body, just write the caudate nucleus. Okay, you don't want to be specifically wrong. All right, how about this point? This capsule right here, do you know what this band of white matter is? That's the internal capsule. But if you have to be very much specific, since we are seeing the thalamus already at this point, most likely it is a part of the posterior limb of the internal capsule, since we are seeing the thalamus already. Oh, by the way, you do know this is the thalamus, right? Okay, the thalamus is residing lateral to the third ventricle in the midline around here. Okay, how about this gray matter right here? That's a lentiform nucleus, which is made up of what? It is made up of an internal globus pallidus and an external what? An external putamen. And as a matter of fact, this internal globus pallidus actually has a globus pallidus internal and a globus pallidus external. But we're not going into that for now, okay? But understand the fact that it exists. And then finally, what is this? This is the internal capsule, right? How about this white band of matter right here? Remind me what it is. If this is the internal capsule, then certainly this is your external capsule. And then the gray matter immediately lateral to that external capsule is what? Remind me what that gray matter is. The claustrum. Okay, the claustrum is what we have here, and it is located just lateral to the external capsule. And lateral to the claustrum right here is another band of white matter called what? The extreme capsule. Okay, the extreme capsule. Internal capsule, external capsule, extreme capsule. How about lateral to the extreme capsule? You will encounter what? You'll be encountering a gray matter in this case. That gray matter is what? Is the insular cortex. Okay, the deepest part of the temporal lobe, insular cortex. So any of these different structures can be pinned. Okay, don't forget this claustrum especially is very much easy to recognize. It's a thin gray matter, thin gray band of gray matter. All right, it is located between the external and extreme capsule, and then the insula is what we're having here, of course. Lateral to the insula, you'll be having the Sylvian fissure immediately. The Sylvian fissure, otherwise called the lateral fissure, and within there you will most likely see branches of the medial cerebral artery. Branches of the medial cerebral artery. Okay, I think that wraps up things on this particular picture. The mammary bodies are somewhere right there, and as a matter of fact, so in fact we have the subthalami right here, the subthalami. Above it is the thalamus, and then just that little band of gray matter right here. It is subthalamus. Okay, let's come to this picture and go dark mode and draw this thing like from our head. Let's do a small diagram. Get a sheet of paper close to you there and also draw with me. Okay, I'm not that good of an artist, but of course I will try to be at my best. Okay, so assuming this is one of the temporal, one of the cerebral hemisphere, and then I'm drawing another cerebral hemisphere on this place. Let me erase that. I'm not that bad. Okay, so okay, let's imagine this another cerebral hemisphere. Right, and you know what this fissure will be. Remind me what that fissure will be. The longitudinal fissure, of course. And immediately inferior to you, you'll be having a band of white matter. The band of white matter will be running somewhere around there. That's a corpus callosum. And above it here, we'll be having a gyrus called the cingulate gyrus. You agree with me? Okay, now let's make beautiful diagrams of our lateral ventricle. Okay, our lateral ventricles will be somewhere around there, to be separated by the septum pellucidum around there. Right, so let's assume this is our lateral ventricle. And now what gray matter will you locate immediately lateral to the lateral ventricle? Remind me what that gray matter will be. The caudate nucleus. The one in blue will be the caudate nucleus. Okay, so now let's assume our what's the name, our third ventricle is in place here. Okay, our third ventricle, let's draw it right here. Yeah, third ventricle is right here. And then immediately lateral to it, we'll find two gray matter, like the thalami. Okay, the two thalami will be located just lateral to it. Alright, they'll be seated right there. And then we have some gray matter around here, the lentiform nucleus. You know what the lentiform nucleus is? It's made up of the putamen and the what? And the globus pallidus. We have globus pallidus around here, globus pallidus around here, and then putamen external to it. Okay, so we're good with that, right? We are leaving out one important sheet of white matter, which should be actually somewhere around here. Do you know what that white matter is? Remind me what it is. Echo it now. We've discussed it. The internal capsule, and most likely it is the posterior limb of the internal capsule, since we are seeing the two thalami already. Okay, so let's go a bit more external now. Now, since this is the internal capsule, the white band of capsule that will be lateral to the lentiform nucleus will now be what? That will be obviously the external capsule. IC internal capsule, EC external capsule, and then we'll see a very thin band of gray matter. What's that thin band of gray matter? It's called the claustrum. The claustrum, and then lateral to the claustrum, we'll find that the another thin band of white matter called what? The extreme capsule. Extreme capsule. Okay, let me draw a better cerebral hemisphere such that we'll be able to see the insular cortex better. Okay, so let me make it somewhere. Ignore my diagram. Okay, you do get a point that this, I'm trying to kind of draw the two temporal lobes. Okay, they're somewhere here such that the insular cortex is very close to it. So just lateral to the extreme capsule, you immediately see the insular cortex. Okay, it's actually a part of the temporal lobe. Are we good? So let's understand this mess of structure right here. Again, we have the internal capsule, the external capsule, the claustrum, extreme capsule, and then we're getting straight to what? The insular cortex. And beyond the insular cortex, you're in the lateral or the cevian fissure, which will most likely have branches of the meducerebral artery. Okay, I think that brings us to the ends of this beautiful session. Let's just let me show you this quick one, this quick picture. I just want you to recognize what is right here. You can see a structure has been pinned here. Let me get your orientation right. These are the two lobes. Let me get a better pen for that. These are the two lobes, and then the longitudinal fissure is here, and actually a white band has been pinned here. Do you know what that white band is? You guessed right. That's obviously the corpus callosum. Okay, that's the corpus callosum. Don't worry, there are a number of quizzes in the description box. Just check the description box after watching this video. You will see a link to a virtual steeplechase session I've designed for you, just to consolidate all we've learned so far in this session. Okay, so, and yeah, that brings us to the end of this beautiful session. Thank you for tuning in. If you find the video helpful, of course, give it a like and subscribe. Many of you haven't subscribed to this channel. Do it to hit the subscribe button, and yes, do attend the quiz I designed for you. Thank you.